Hi, I'm Tracy Koga with something short and fun. This is a Hue Soundbite. In the last, I think, at least for sure, a year and a half, I have never used the word vaccine more in my life. And I guess we've all become familiar with vaccines through the pandemic, through COVID. And I have my very special friend here, and I'm going to say she's an expert on everything to do with medical information, especially rare genetic diseases. But it's so good to have you live here in person, Dr. Cheryl Rockman-Greenberg. But from now on, I'm calling you Cheryl. And we had a really interesting conversation over the phone. And I really wanted to do this chat. And we're also going to have some virtual guests join us too, because information needs to be out there. You know, like I said before, we've learned so much through COVID and how fast a vaccine can come. And it's not a cure, but definitely has given at least some room of comfort. Now, for you and your line of study, rare genetic diseases, and the whole long process of getting even a drug to even to one level, and let alone even become available, is so unbelievably long. What is so important? What needs to change, I guess? And we'll talk about it.
Well, Tracy, first of all, thank you so much for showing some interest in this subject. Because as you mentioned, you know, during COVID time, we all, regardless of the area in which we work, have been so consumed with COVID. And this is not in any way to say that whatever COVID has taught us is not important, but it also brings up the point that, you know, life goes on for people outside of COVID. And, you know, my colleagues and I have had to try to continue to respond to the areas in which we work and to meet our patients' needs. So to do a talk today a little bit about some of the challenges that our patients face when dealing with rare disorders. And there are many, many rare disorders that are genetic, but there are many rare disorders that are not genetic. To have a program on this is something I greatly, greatly appreciate. It's certainly very close to my heart. So I'm really happy to talk about rare diseases, and not so much in the time of COVID, but especially in the time of COVID, we cannot forget that there are people out there who are dealing with the day-to-day issues of complex rare diseases.
And it's hard too because the hospitals are full. Like for you, I guess, Cheryl, what in your own personal opinion have you seen, you know, with these patients that are also so sick but cannot get the right help?
Well, I think one of the messages that came throughout COVID, and people were afraid to go to hospitals, afraid to go to the doctors. If you have any disease, whether it's a rare genetic disease or a rare disease, and you need help, you must seek out your help, your care providers, and people have to continue to go to emergency or to their care providers to get the help. So that, you know, the care of patients with rare diseases has continued throughout COVID and should continue throughout COVID. Much of the care has gone virtual, so there's many appointments that can be done virtually, and that has actually been a great boon for patients, particularly those who live out of town, far from the tertiary center where we work and where some of our guest, Dr. Sears, works. So virtual medicine has really enhanced our ability to reach our patients with rare genetic and metabolic disorders. But nonetheless, face-to-face meetings and the care that they require has probably increased because people have had the questions, of course, what does COVID mean to my rare disease? So we've had to deal with that with all our groups of patients, as well as dealing with their underlying condition.
And now let's talk about clinical trials or the process to get a drug approved. How long and how arduous is it?
Well, it is said from the time a research discovery is made about a potential for a new treatment to the time you can actually, in your doctor's office, receive a prescription, it could be about 20 years. You know, now we know how accelerated access to vaccines have happened during COVID, but in the world of rare genetic and metabolic diseases, discoveries are increasing exponentially through research and through clinical trials. But the whole process of ultimately getting approval And having drugs on provincial formularies takes a very, very long time. It's a very, very complicated process. There are many, many players involved.
Oh, and well, who could we lobby to, or who could we go to?
Well, I always say the most important thing, when you present to your physician, is that the diagnosis has to be made. So when you're dealing with rare diseases, whether they're genetic or non-genetic, the very first thing is you have to get a diagnosis. So it's up to my colleagues and I and the care providers in the community to make sure that they keep rare diseases on their agenda and to seek out the proper specialty consultations and subspecialty consultations to get access to accurate diagnoses. So once you have a diagnosis, okay, then it's up to the care provider and the specialists and subspecialists involved to identify, are there any new treatments from a pharmacologic point of view, any new drugs that can be used for this disorder? Are these drugs in clinical trials? And most clinical trials are either done from, they're pharmaceutically driven and they're pharma-oriented, or sometimes the investigator himself or herself can lead a clinical trial. So are there clinical trials to which we can refer our patients? And once the clinical trials, and we have many websites and the ability to follow where are the clinical trials for certain diseases. And once a clinical trial is over, the data have to be analyzed and then decide, is the drug meeting the outcome measures that is necessary? Is the outcome that the drug is effective, has it been proven? Is the drug safe? How good is the evidence? And then it's the whole process of going with our regulatory bodies to decide, will this drug actually be approved for, and we recommend it to list on our provincial formularies. And once there is an approval process, then of course the company that is sponsoring the clinical trial or whoever is dealing with the drug has to negotiate a price that the payers will agree to.
And we'll stop it right there, because I know price is actually a great segue to our virtual guests. I want to welcome Dr. Sandra Sears. She's an endocrinologist at University of British Columbia. Welcome, Sandra. And of course, Tara Fowler. And Tara, you're going to share your personal story. I'm going to get Cheryl to introduce you, but I am actually going to welcome both of you into our virtual chat. And Sandra, pricing. Why are some drugs so astronomically expensive?
Thank you. And I'd just like to echo Cheryl's thanks for having a podcast on this topic, because like Cheryl, I feel very strongly that the scope of this problem is not something that most people know. And we really need people to know about it, not just patients and doctors, but taxpayers and government. We're talking about a humongous scope in terms of price. We are talking about multiple drugs that cost $500, $600, $800, $1,000 a year or more per patient for ongoing therapy. And some of the newer gene therapies and specialized cancer therapies will be in the seven figures, so over $1 million. Now, there are several aspects to this, okay? The first aspect is that although rare diseases are rare, collectively there's a whole bunch of them, and it's actually estimated that 1 in 12 Canadians has a rare disease. So when we're looking at these very, very high cost drugs, we are actually in a situation currently in Canada where close to 10% of provincial drug budgets are being used to fund a fraction of a percent of patients. And that would be fine for those drugs that work really well, right? Because I think Canadians in general, they support the treatment of patients with bad diseases. The problem with rare diseases is that doing research on them is more difficult. So we often, when a drug comes to market, don't know how well it works. And in fact, many of these drugs actually, when we have studied them after they've been on the market, do not work very well at all or at all. And so when we're talking about not just astronomical costs and astronomical costs that are, at the level which is not sustainable in a publicly funded healthcare system, but also when we have serious questions about whether or not a drug works, because you don't want to keep giving a patient a drug that does not work. You're exposing them to the side effects and you're not helping them. Then we really see that what we need is some infrastructure around not just escalating the access, because for sure we want patients to get rapid access to drugs, but we also need to know if they work, because if they don't work, we need to stop giving them to them. That's the first thing. And the second thing is we need to say, why doesn't it work? I mean, it sounds like it should work. It makes sense that it should work, but it doesn't work. So what do we need to do to actually find a drug that does work? That's what we need for patients. We need access and we need drugs that work. Those two things right now are being are really a problem.
Wow. And I guess too, Sandra, in your opinion, how safe are drugs?
Some drugs are not very safe at all. I'll give you an example of that was a recent study looking at certain cancer drugs are sometimes expedited to the market because there's an unmet need, and then you need to collect evidence on how well they work after people are already taking them. And a very recent study showed that about 30% of the drugs that were brought to the market in that way, so brought to market without evidence that they worked yet because they were expedited, didn't work at all. And this has two consequences from a patient's viewpoint, both of which are unacceptable. So the first is that these are cancer drugs and therefore have a wide range of side effects, and the patients continued to take them and were exposed to the wide range of side effects. And secondly, and more importantly, those patients, because they were taking a drug that did not work, were not offered a drug that might have worked. And so this is unacceptable, I think, for patients and physicians. So although we all want to speed up access, we need to do it in such a way that we have a way of evaluating whether or not the drug is working. And that's just a critical piece in terms of giving the best care to patients.
Wow. Okay, so I want to bring in Tara, and I want you, Cheryl, maybe just to give a little preface.
Sure. Also, thank you, Sandra, for everything that you said. When you talk a little bit about evidence, I want to just qualify this to reassure people who are listening. And I know, Sandra, that I'm not directly involved in COVID research and vaccine research, but I have a lot of confidence in the people and the science who are making recommendations regarding access to COVID vaccine. So this is not about COVID.
No,
we got good evidence.
Yes.
And they work.
Yes.
But talking about our access to drugs for rare and ultra-rare diseases, I'm not Tara's daughter, whose name is Megan's doctor. I am a colleague of Megan's doctor. Tara's daughter's name is Megan, and she was diagnosed, 2018 or so, or 2017, with an ultra-rare kidney disease, dense deposit disease, DDD, goes by a couple of names. And her specialist, who cares for Megan, contacted me because I'm involved in helping get access to proven drugs for rare diseases. If I could help in the process of acquiring access to another drug called eculizumab that was approved in other countries for a variety of similar kidney diseases, but not specifically for dense deposit disease. And Megan's doctor, Megan and Tara, started on a journey in 2018 that I'll let Tara tell you about. Tara?
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me into this talk today. Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about our experience with trying to get a rare drug for the rare disease that Megan has. Like Cheryl said, it is called eculizumab, and at the time in 2018, it was one of the most expensive drugs in the world. And I know Megan's doctor and her whole team worked really hard at getting access to it. They spent probably from February to April trying to get access to our drug, to this particular drug that we needed. We applied to the company and we got a denial letter. We applied to Manitoba Health and we received a denial letter. I reached out to the government, to the Manitoba Health Minister here in our province, and got a denial letter. Our insurance wouldn't cover it. We were able to get, Megan's team was able to advocate for her, and we were able to get 4 doses back in April and May of 2018, funded by, I believe it was the Children's Hospital Foundation. Don't quote me on that though. And so we did get access to 4 doses through April and May, and then through the Children's Hospital, and then the WHRA was able to access their contingency fund and get us 4 more doses. So we were lucky enough to get a total of 8 doses back in 2018. And because Megan had decompensated and wasn't doing very well at all in 2018 and was losing kidney function and had a really bad nephrotic flare. And so after receiving eculizumab, or 8 doses of eculizumab from April to September, her kidney function rose back up, and she no longer needed to be hospitalized and did not need any kind of treatment besides the basic kidney disease treatment. And so we were super happy that we were able to access those 8 doses. Unfortunately, that was it. We didn't have any more after that. And by spring of 2019, she was in full-on kidney failure. And so our concern is, we can get Timberland to the expense. It wasn't approved for long-term use. And we really needed long-term use of this drug to save Megan's kidney.
Oh, wow.
Sorry to see. I don't know if you got the most of that. She ultimately got approval for a longer course, but by then Megan's kidney function had deteriorated to the point that the drug could no longer be used anymore, and that Megan went on dialysis and is on a transplant list now.
And Tara, can I ask, what was the cost of the drug?
$50,000 a dose.
I think I know the first 2 doses were higher, and I think they were $12,000 a dose.
Wow.
And after that, they were $8,000 a dose.
Incredible.
Eculizumab in adults is the list price is over $700,000 a year.
Oh my goodness.
So Megan as a child would obviously be at a lower dose, but like as Tara said, one of the most expensive drugs in the world. And interestingly, Canada has the highest prices of eculizumab, to my knowledge, than any country in the world. Yeah,
that's another issue about pricing.
Yeah, and who regulates that? The government? Who creates those prices?
Well, don't get me started. The
Go for it, Sandra. Go for it, Sandra.
Creates those prices, and I think this is actually one of I hate to hear stories like Tara is talking about with Megan. How much pressure on families. That's not what we need families to do, right? If we had some kind of infrastructure where we could say, okay, this is a very rare kidney disease. We don't know if this drug works in this kidney disease, so let's slot her in and do, what we call an N of 1 trial, okay? And if she responds, then she can continue, right? And that contributes to evidence. Then that would have saved this family and all of the people around her who are lobbying and advocating. And we don't want patients to have to deal with this. At the same time, since I've told you that the eculizumab prices are higher in Canada than in other countries, you have to say, well, WTF, if you pardon the language. And actually, Canada has the 3rd highest drug prices in the OECD. I think Canadians think that Canada has good prices because it has good prices relative to the United States, but that's not saying anything. Comparator. And this is another reason we want people to know about this problem, because if, for example, there are strategies that governments might propose to try and rein in prices, we believe that taxpayers need to know that these have to be supported, right? Because this is just not feasible. And there's no reason whatsoever that Canada should pay more for the same drug than Britain or Australia. Why should we pay more than that? So we need to actually support that. And the final thing I'll say, it sort of goes back to the COVID situation where I think a lot of people were saying, well, why isn't Canada in the business of manufacturing vaccines? You know, would our supply have been better if we were in the business of manufacturing vaccines? And I would just say that the issue of manufacturing drugs in Canada is something that has been lost over many, many governments of many different stripes. It wasn't a decision by any, but I'm hoping as people now seem to support the idea of maybe local vaccine manufacture, that they might also say, hey, should we be looking at some of the other drugs that are really putting a drain on our healthcare system? And that's again why we want the public to know about this problem. So rather than saying that's a crazy waste of money to make stuff, let's just buy it from another country, maybe they'll say, hey, you know, maybe the better thing to do for some drugs is actually to make them in Canada.
And you agree, Cheryl?
I totally agree. I wanted to just build on that with three quick comments. The first has to do, I mean, pricing is really an important factor ultimately in whether our patients can access these drugs and whether they'll be listed on provincial formularies. So there's no question that pricing is important, and Sandra and many others are working on strategies with multiple stakeholders to how to make this whole issue of pricing of drugs for rare diseases, you know, more economical in the sense that is going to improve the access. The same thing has to do with pricing is not the only reason but whether or not a drug will get listed on our formularies. It has, as Sandra mentioned, a lot to do with evidence. Mm-hmm. And we know, because our clinical trials for rare disorders often involve a small number of patients, not thousands and thousands like you might see in COVID, that evidence sometimes is slow in accumulating. But that does not mean that we mustn't continue to do the proper clinical trials and gain the evidence. And the N=1 route and accumulating what's called real-world evidence to help make the case whether or not a drug is effective is something that we strongly, strongly advocate. And thirdly, as Sandra mentioned, you know, the pressure on the patients to try. The patients are under tremendous pressure. They're quite desperate. They want something to help their disease, to help their child's disease, and they're very vulnerable. So as physicians, you know, we have to make sure that all the patients' needs are met and that they are feeling supported by their healthcare providers and also by the public in helping gain access to proven new drugs for these rare diseases. And there's an exponential increase in the number of approved drugs that we're going to see in the next 5 to 10 years, which is exciting for patients, exciting for families, and exciting for us as care providers.
Oh, no doubt. And do you kind of think that maybe this whole pandemic has kind of spurred that on too?
It hasn't hurt,
yeah,
because it has highlighted the whole area. I mean, you know, for years and years, I've been getting flu vaccines. I never dawned on me to ask what's in a vaccine, you know.
Yeah, no.
Yes, I get the vaccine. Now people, I think, are learning that it's important to ask questions, and it's important to really to seek out answers, but to pick and choose really where the real sources of the right answers are available to them. So I think it's definitely helped.
Yes.
It's definitely helped.
So Tara, now, how is Megan? And I guess, how are you and the family now moving forward?
Megan has been on dialysis since July of 2019, and she does well on dialysis. She goes 4 days a week. It helps her tremendously. She is scheduled for transplant on November 4th.
Oh.
She'll be keeping my kidney.
Oh,
wow.
Wonderful.
So the strain on our family has been enormous. You know, she was extremely sick from her kidney failure in spring of 2019, and her and I spent 2 months in hospital. So I lived there. I worked from the hospital. I spent some time, you know, 4 hours a day going into work. And so she wasn't at home with us, and I wasn't at home with my other family members. And now that she's getting dialysis, her father takes her back and forth to the hospital 4 times a week. And so, you know, there's a cost and there's a strain on the whole family when one of the family members is so sick.
Yeah, No. Yeah.
I want to add one thing, you know, Tara, the striving to get approval for eculizumab is not over, even after the transplant. You know, there's some evidence that, you know, we're going to have to restart, you know, that request, depending how Megan does, because
Absolutely.
eculizumab may still be indicated, you know, in some of the post-transplant patients. And as even in the past 3 years, the evidence for the use of eculizumab in this and some other similar kidney diseases, you know, is changing the all the indications. And as Sandra says, you know, the real world evidence needs to be accumulated so we can make our right recommendations to our payers and our regulators.
So the case is ongoing. I was curious, how old is Megan, Tara? Oh, she might be frozen. Tara, how old is Megan?
I don't think she can.
She is now 17. Am I unfrozen?
Yeah, you're unfrozen now.
You're unfrozen, but I couldn't make that out. It was garbled. Say again.
Megan is 17 years old.
Now she's
Oh,
17.
lovely. Oh, my goodness. And who knows, you know, maybe she'll be walking down graduation row, right? If all things go, you know, go considered. And wow, it's I guess a silver lining through all of this too. And I mean, I can't imagine the strain on your family, Tara, and and of course, COVID and everything else that on top of it. But I think that you are in good hands with such advocates like this. And
She has a wonderful doctor, her specialist, her pediatric kidney specialist, and you'll soon be moving up to the adult world. Oh no, but they'll take good care of her too.
We're a little nervous about that transfer. They're keeping us until she's 19 though, because of COVID, everything's been delayed.
Oh,
so
that's good.
A little grateful for that. We get to stay with our favorite team until she's 19 because Megan's team has been fantastic. Her transplant doctor has advocated for her, and if her disease begins to attack her kidney again after surgery, she is already qualified to enter a trial for a different drug that will help with her C3G. So, you know, there's trials coming down the pipeline, and there's new drugs coming down the pipeline, and we want to be part of that and of creating and approving new drugs.
so
Couldn't say it.
I know.
She says it better than ever. Right?
yeah. So Tara, any kind of words of wisdom for other families that could be in the same situation as yours?
The thing that's been most supportive to me, besides Megan's own team, is seeking out parents of children who also have the same disease and just talking to them and connecting with them. That has been extremely helpful.
No doubt. And for you, Sandra, I know that you're going to be marching on along with Cheryl here. What can we do now as concerned citizens? You know, and rightfully so, we don't know anything about this until we're actually in it, and until we're actually like Tara. And that at that point, it almost seems like a little too late. But what can we do now?
Well, I think every stakeholder has a role here. I think patients and families, like Tara has said, they said that she supports developing new evidence. We need everyone to support developing new evidence. In fact, we need it to be mandatory, I think, in terms of when we actually don't know if a drug works, we need to collect evidence to say that it does. We also need patients and families to understand that if the drug doesn't work, that we should be stopping it, right? And that's a really hard thing to understand if you're talking about a rare disease where there's not something else. We need physicians, as Cheryl said, to think, could this be a rare disease? They don't have to know which one, but they need to think, well, is it possible that it's a rare disease? And they also need to support the evidence collection. We need governments to support, provide us some infrastructure to actually get high quality real world evidence collected. And we need them to use that to reevaluate decisions, as Cheryl has said with eculizumab in particular. When it came to market several years ago, there wasn't information on these kidney diseases, and we need to change that. And finally, and quite frankly, we need manufacturers to drop the price. The profit margin on rare disease drugs is double the profit margin on drugs for common diseases. That is not reasonable. What is reasonable is for them to make a fair profit, the same profit, and that will mean the drugs will be more expensive than drugs for high blood pressure or diabetes, but double the profit, that is not acceptable. And we need to work with other countries, I think, to really try and rein in that spending. And that's what we want taxpayers to support. We want taxpayers to support any initiatives that we can to bring the prices down on the drugs so that the patients can have them, right? That's what's important.
Yes, bottom line, we just want to find a cure and quality of life. So, Cheryl, I guess if you want to close up, but I think, thank you so much, Tara, for sharing your story, and good luck, our fingers crossed, for you and Megan, November 4th. It's going to be Miracle Day. And thank you so much, Dr. Sandra Sers. I'm sure that we'll have you back. I want to see where we've gone, or if we've gone any further.
Well, there are many support organizations and lay groups in Canada who are working on many aspects of a rare disease strategy for Canada. And maybe I can give you some links, and maybe you can share with your listeners, if they want to get more information about this, how to become better informed, because no question, we need all the support we can get for our patients.
Oh, well, thank you so much. We'll post those links up on our Facebook page at I Like Hue. Thank you so much, Cheryl. It's always been a pleasure. Thank you
so much for having us. Thank you, Tara, for coming. Sandra, thank you. Nice to see you. We'll speak again very soon. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.